The auctioneer's gavel slammed down with the force of thunder. But 17-year-old Marlo Finch barely heard it over the hammering of her own heart. She pressed herself against the weathered fence of the auction yard, dirt-stained fingers, gripping the splintered wood as she watched the most beautiful horse she'd ever seen being led into the ring. The colt was magnificent, a golden palomino, with a mane that caught the afternoon light like spun silk. His eyes, dark and intelligent, swept across the crowd of potential buyers with an almost human awareness. But it wasn't his beauty that made Marlo's breath catch in her throat. It was the way he moved, with a grace that spoke of wild freedom, barely contained, and the unmistakable look of defiance in his stance. Lot 47, the auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty yard. 2-year-old Palomino colt, unbroken but gentle-handled. Bloodlines trace back to champion stock. Will start. The bidding at $5,000, Marlo's heart sank. 5,000 might as well have been 5 million. She clutched the crumpled $20 bill in her pocket. Her entire savings from months of mucking stalls at Henderson's Stableland felt foolish for even dreaming. The bidding war began immediately. Hands shot up around the ring as serious. Buyers recognized quality when they saw it. 10,000, 15, 20. The numbers climbed higher than most people's annual salaries. But Marlo couldn't tear her eyes away from the colt. That's when she noticed something extraordinary. Despite the chaos of the auction, the shouting voices and waving hands, the colt's attention kept drifting to her corner of the fence. Their eyes met across the dusty arena, and Marlo felt something electric pass between them, a connection she couldn't explain but couldn't deny. 35,000, called a voice that cut through the crowd like a blade. Every head turned toward the source. Rutherford Ashworth 3-stepped forward, his tailored suit immaculate despite the dust swirling through the air. At 62, he was one of the wealthiest men in 3 counties, with a reputation for collecting the finest horses money could buy. His estate, Ashworth Manor, housed a stable of champions that lesser horsemen could only dream of owning. The other bidders hesitated. Going up against Rutherford Ashworth wasn't just expensive, it was futile. The man had never met a horse he couldn't buy or a price he couldn't pay. 40,000, Ashworth declared, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. The auctioneer's eyes swept the crowd hopefully. Do I hear 55? Silence fell over the auction yard like a heavy blanket. Even the hardiest bidders knew when they were outmatched. Marlo watched in despair as her impossible dream slipped further away, going once at $40,000. The auctioneer called. The colt's head turned again, and his dark eyes found Marlo's across the crowd. In that moment, she saw something that made her gasp, longing. Not for freedom, not for open pastures, but for her. Somehow, impossibly, this magnificent creature had chosen her just as surely as she had chosen him. Going twice, Marlo's hand moved before her mind could stop it. The $20 bill fluttered in the breeze as she raised it high above her head, knowing it was hopeless, but unable to stay silent. $20, she called out, her voice cracking with emotion. The crowd erupted in laughter, but Marlo didn't care. She had to try. The laughter died abruptly when the colt did something no one expected. With a powerful surge, he broke free from the handler's loose grip and bolted not toward the exit gates. Not toward the open fields beyond, but straight toward Marlo. Chaos erupted in the auction yard. Handlers rushed forward with ropes and leads, buyers scrambled out of the way, and security guards shouted orders. But the colt paid no attention to any of them. He leaped the low fence with the grace of a natural athlete and came to a gentle stop directly in front of the girl who had bid $20 on a $40,000 horse. Marlowe stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe as the magnificent animal lowered his head and nuzzled her shoulder. His warm breath tickled her neck, and she felt tears spring to her eyes. Around them, the auction yard had fallen silent, except for the murmur of amazed voices. "Well, I'll be damned," the auctioneer muttered into his microphone, his voice carrying. Across the stunned crowd, Rutherford Ashworth pushed through the gathering spectators, his face a mask of controlled fury. He wasn't used to losing, and he certainly wasn't used to losing to a girl in patched jeans and worn boots who couldn't scrape together enough money for a decent meal. "That animal is dangerous," he declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. "It needs proper handling by professionals. Miss, you need to step away before someone gets hurt." But even as he spoke, the Colt remained perfectly calm beside Marlowe, his head resting gently against her shoulder, as if he'd found exactly where he belonged. She reached up with trembling fingers to stroke his neck, and he whickered softly in response. "He's not dangerous," Marlowe said quietly, but her voice carried in the stillness. "He's just ... choosing." "Horses don't choose," Ashworth snapped, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "They respond to training and authority. What you're seeing is coincidence, nothing more." The auction manager, a weathered man named Crenshaw Pike, who'd been running horse sales for 30 years, approached cautiously. He'd seen a lot of unusual things in his time, but nothing quite like this. "Mr. Ashworth," Pike said carefully, "your bid of $40,000 stands as the highest. The sale is legitimate." He paused, glancing between the millionaire and the girl, who seemed to have won the Colt's heart without spending a penny. "But I've never seen anything like this before." "Neither have I," said a new voice from the crowd. Everyone turned to see an elderly woman making her way through the spectators. Constance Fairweather was a legend in the horse world, former Olympic rider whose knowledge of equine behavior was matched only by her reputation for being impossible to fool. "Constance," Ashworth nodded stiffly, "I'm sure you'll agree that this situation is highly irregular and potentially dangerous." The old woman approached the Colt and Marlowe with the confident ease of someone who'd spent 70 years around horses. The Colt watched her carefully but didn't move away from Marlowe's side. "40 years ago," Constance said slowly, "I saw something similar. A wild Mustang that had been captured and brought to auction. He was magnificent, like this one, and completely unmanageable. 3 different trainers had given up on him." She smiled at the memory. "Then a young Mexican boy wandered into the corral, and that horse walked right up to him like our old friend. They were inseparable from that day forward. Folklore and coincidence," Ashworth dismissed. But his voice had lost some of its authority. Constance ignored him, focusing instead on Marlowe. "What's your name, child?" "Marlowe Finch," she replied, never taking her eyes off the Colt. "And what do you know about horses, Marlowe Finch?" Marlowe straightened her shoulders. She might not have money, but she had experience. "I've been working at Henderson's stable for 3 years. I know how to feed, groom, and exercise horses. I know their moods and their needs, and I know when something special is happening." She turned to face the crowd, her hand still resting on the Colt's neck. "I know I can't afford him. I know Mr. Ashworth has every right to take him home. But look at him." Her voice grew stronger. "Really look at him. He's trying to tell us something." As if on cue, the Colt lifted his head and whinnied not the panicked cry of a frightened animal, but a clear, purposeful call that seemed to echo across the entire auction yard. The sound that escaped Constance Fairweather's lips was half laugh, half gasp. In all her decades around horses, she'd never heard anything quite like that. Call so deliberate, so communicative. It was as if the colt was making his own bid for freedom. "Remarkable," she murmured, then raised her voice to address the crowd. "Mr. Pike, I'd like to propose something unusual." The auction manager looked nervous. Unusual proposals at horse auctions typically meant complications, legal challenges, and headaches that lasted for months. "Mrs. Fairweather, with respect, we have a clear, high bidder. The sale should proceed normally." "Normally, yes," Constance agreed, her keen eyes moving between Ashworth and Marlowe. "But this situation is anything but normal. When was the last time you saw a horse make such a clear choice?" Rutherford Ashworth stepped forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Mrs. Fairweather, I appreciate your reputation, but sentiment doesn't change facts. I've made the highest bid, and I intend to take possession of my property, your property." Marlowe spoke up, surprising herself with her boldness. The colt beside her shifted slightly, as if responding to the tension in her voice. "He's not property. He's a living being with feelings and preferences." "Horses are livestock," Ashworth replied coldly. "Valuable livestock, but livestock nonetheless. They don't have preferences beyond food and shelter." As if to contradict him, the colt took several steps backward, pulling away from the approaching handlers. Ashworth had signaled forward, but he didn't bolt again. Instead, he positioned himself protectively in front of Marlowe, his body language unmistakably clear. The crowd murmured in amazement. Even the most skeptical observers couldn't deny what they were seeing. Constance Fairweather smiled, the sort of smile that usually preceded her most outrageous suggestions. "Mr. Ashworth, you're a sportsman, aren't you? You enjoy a good competition." "I enjoy winning," he replied cautiously. "Then let me propose a test. A challenge, if you will." Constance's voice carried across the silent auction yard. "Give this young lady 30 days with the colt. If she can train him to saddle and bridle, if she can demonstrate the kind of partnership we're seeing hints of today, then perhaps his choice should be respected." "Absolutely not," Ashworth snapped. "I've paid good money, you've offered good money," Pike corrected carefully. "The payment hasn't been processed yet." Marlowe's heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Mrs. Fairweather, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't have a place to keep him. I don't have the money for feed or veterinary care. I can't." "You can use my facilities," Constance interrupted. "I have an empty stall at Fairweather Farm, and I'm curious enough about this situation to sponsor the experiment." The offer hung in the air like a challenge thrown down between medieval knights. Ashworth's face darkened with anger, but Marlowe could see something else in his expression: intrigue. The man hadn't built his fortune by backing down from interesting wagers. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked slowly. Constance smiled wider. 30 days. The girl gets 30 days to prove that this connection is real, that it can be developed into a true partnership. If she succeeds, if she can demonstrate control, trust, and genuine horsemanship, then the colt stays with her. And if she fails, then you get your horse, and you'll never be bothered by romantic notions about equine choice again. "This is preposterous," Ashworth muttered, but Marlowe could see him calculating. 30 days was nothing to a man of his wealth. If he won, he'd have proven his point about professional training versus amateur sentiment. If he lost, well, Rutherford Ashworth III had never lost a wager involving horses. I'll need guarantees, he said finally. Professional supervision, objective judging, clear criteria for success or failure. Agreed, Constance nodded. I'll supervise personally, and we'll bring in 3 independent judges from the American Quarter Horse Association. They'll evaluate based on standard training benchmarks for a 2-year-old colt. Marlowe found her voice again. What if I hurt him? What if I'm not good enough? The colt turned his head at her words and gently nudged her cheek with his nose, as if reassuring her. The gesture was so tender, so deliberate, that several people in the crowd audibly sighed. Child, Constance said gently, I've watched you with him for the past 20 minutes. You're already communicating better than most trainers do after weeks of work. Trust yourself. Pike cleared his throat. Mr. Ashworth, do you accept these terms? All eyes turned to the millionaire. He stood silently for a long moment, his gaze moving from the girl to the horse to the expectant faces surrounding them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man unaccustomed to uncertainty. 30 days, he agreed. But I want daily reports, and if that animal shows any sign of dangerous behavior, the arrangement ends immediately. Marlowe felt her knees go weak with a mixture of terror and elation. Somehow, impossibly, she'd just been given a chance to prove that love could triumph over money. Dawn broke over Fairweather Farm with the kind of golden light that photographers spend fortunes trying to capture. Marlowe had been awake for an hour already, standing at the fence of the training paddock and watching the colt her colt. At least for the next 29 days graze in the morning mist. She'd named him Aurelius during their first night together, after the Roman emperor known for his wisdom and strength. The name seemed to fit his regal bearing and intelligent eyes. Early morning philosopher, Constance Fairweather approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee, her boots crunching softly on the gravel path. I couldn't sleep, Marlowe admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Every time I close my eyes, I remember what I've gotten myself into. Second thoughts. Marlowe watched Aurelius lift his head from the grass and look directly at her, as if he'd sensed her presence from 50 yards away. No, but I'm terrified I'll let him down. Good, Constance said firmly. Fear keeps you careful. Overconfidence gets people hurt. She sipped her coffee and studied the colt with the experienced eye of someone who'd trained champions. He's been watching the gate since 5 this morning, waiting for you. It was true. Despite having access to the entire paddock, Aurelius had positioned himself where he could see the path leading from the main house. When Marlowe whistled softly, he walked over with the easy confidence of a horse who knew he was wanted. Day 3, Constance observed. Most trainers would still be working on basic trust exercises. You're already past that stage. The first 2 days had been a revelation. While Marlowe had expected to spend weeks gaining Aurelius's confidence, he'd approached her immediately, as if they'd known each other for years. By the second day, he was following her around the paddock without a lead rope, responding to her voice commands and hand signals with an eagerness that amazed even Constance. The scary part is how easy it's been, Marlowe confessed. It doesn't feel like training. It feels like ... conversation. As if to prove her point, Aurelius stretched his neck over the fence and gently lipped at her hair. Marlowe laughed and scratched behind his ears, earning a contented sigh from the colt. Mrs. Fairweather, a crisp voice interrupted from behind. Then they turned to see Rutherford Ashworth approaching, accompanied by a stern-looking woman in professional riding attire. Even at 7 in the morning, Ashworth looked impeccable in pressed khakis and a spotless polo shirt. Mr. Ashworth, Constance replied coolly. You're early. I brought Dr. Valdez, he said, gesturing to his companion. She's a certified equine behaviorist. I want an independent assessment of the Colt's progress. Dr. Valdez stepped forward with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with wealthy clients and their expensive hobbies. Miss Finch, I'd like to observe your training session this morning. Standard evaluation protocol. Marlowe felt her stomach clench with nerves, but Aurelius seemed unperturbed by the newcomers. If anything, he appeared more alert, as if he understood that something important was happening. Of course, Marlowe agreed, though her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. For the next hour, Dr. Valdez watched with clinical attention as Marlowe worked with Aurelius. They practiced leading exercises, ground manners, and basic voice commands. The Colt performed flawlessly, but Marlowe could feel the weight of judgment in every step. Interesting, Dr. Valdez murmured, making notes on her tablet. The response time is exceptional. Most Colts require multiple repetitions to learn new commands. He's always been quick, Marlowe said, trying to hide her pride. Quick is one thing. This is ... unusual. Dr. Valdez approached the fence, and Aurelius immediately moved closer to Marlowe, not in fear but in a clear display of loyalty. Mr. Ashworth, I need to be honest. In 15 years of equine behavioral analysis, I've never seen this level of immediate bonding. Ashworth's jaw tightened. Bonding is fine, but can she actually train him? Can she prepare him for serious riding? That remains to be seen, Dr. Valdez replied diplomatically. But the foundation is remarkably solid. After the evaluators left, Marlowe slumped against the fence, emotionally drained. Aurelius immediately came to her side, resting his head against her shoulder in what had become their signature gesture of comfort. He's not giving up, Constance observed, watching Ashworth's car disappear down the drive. If anything, what he saw this morning has made him more determined. What if I can't do it? Marlowe whispered. What if I freeze up during the final evaluation? What if Aurelius whickered softly and nudged her cheek, interrupting her spiral of worry? When she looked into his dark eyes, she saw complete faith not in her abilities as a trainer, but in her as a person. It was a trust so absolute it took her breath away. He believes in you, Constance said quietly. The question is, do you believe in yourself? By day 15, word of the challenge had spread throughout the local horse community like wildfire. Fairweather Farm found itself hosting an increasing number of casual visitors, who just happened to drop by during Marlowe's training sessions. The girl who'd bid $20 on a $40,000 horse had become something of a local legend. Marlowe tried to ignore the attention, but it wasn't easy. Every mistake felt magnified, every small victory scrutinized. Worse, Aurelius seemed to sense her growing anxiety, becoming more protective and less willing to work when strangers were present. He's shielding you, Constance observed as they watched Aurelius position himself between Marlowe and a group of curious onlookers. Most horses look to their handlers for protection. He's trying to protect you. It was true, and it was becoming a problem. While Aurelius continued to excel in their private sessions, he grew increasingly resistant to performing when others were watching. For the final evaluation in 2 weeks, he would need to demonstrate his training in front of judges, spectators, and Rutherford Ashworth. Maybe this was all a mistake, Marlowe said, slumping on a hay bale after another frustrating session. Maybe Mr. Ashworth was right. Maybe I'm just a girl with romantic notions. Aurelius, who had been grazing nearby, immediately lifted his head at the despair in her voice. He walked over and gently nuzzled her face, whickering softly. "He doesn't think it's a mistake," Constance pointed out. "But what if I can't get him to perform under pressure?" "What if—" "Stop," Constance interrupted firmly. "You're spiraling, and he's feeding off your energy. Take a breath." Marlowe closed her eyes and focused on the warmth of Aurelius's breath. Against her cheek, the solid comfort of his presence. Gradually, her heartbeat slowed. "Better," Constance nodded. "Now, what's the real problem here?" "People," Marlowe admitted. "When it's just us, everything flows naturally. But when others are watching, I freeze up. I start second-guessing every decision." And he senses that. Yes. Then he gets protective, which makes him seem difficult, which proves Mr. Ash's point about needing professional training. Constance was quiet for a long moment, studying the girl and the Colt, who seemed to share an almost telepathic connection. "You know, in all my years of training, I've learned that the best partnerships aren't about dominance or control. They're about trust and communication. I thought that's what we had." "You do, but you're not trusting it when it matters most." Constance stood and brushed hay from her jeans. "Tomorrow, we're going to try something different." The next morning, Marlowe arrived at the training paddock to find it transformed. Constance had set up obstacles, jumps, and various challenges throughout the space. More surprisingly, she'd invited a dozen people to watch, neighbors, other trainers, even some of the local press. "Mrs. Fairweather, what is this?" Marlowe asked, panic rising in her chest. "This is your breakthrough moment," Constance replied calmly. "You can't avoid performing under pressure forever. Better to face it now, when the stakes are lower." Aurelius emerged from his stall and immediately assessed the situation. Crowd, obstacles, tension in the air. His ears flicked back, and he moved closer to Marlowe, ready to defend her if necessary. "I can't do this," Marlowe whispered. "You can. But first, you need to remember something." Constance placed a gentle hand on Marlowe's shoulder. "This isn't about proving anything to them. It's about communicating with him. Everything else is just noise." Marlowe looked at Aurelius, who was watching her with those intelligent dark eyes. In that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. She stopped thinking about the crowd, the pressure, the consequences. Instead, she focused entirely on the magnificent creature beside her, the one who had chosen her above wealth and prestige. "Want to show them what we can do together," she whispered to Aurelius. His ears pricked forward, and she could swear she saw him nod. What followed was the most beautiful demonstration of partnership anyone present had ever witnessed. Marlowe and Aurelius moved through the obstacles like dancers, communicating with subtle shifts in body language and barely audible voice cues. The Colt performed flawlessly, not because he was obeying commands, but because he was engaged in a conversation with someone he trusted completely. When they finished, the crowd was silent. Then, slowly, applause began, not the polite clapping of observers, but the genuine appreciation of people who had witnessed something extraordinary. "Well," Constance said quietly, wiping tears from her eyes, "I think we're ready for the final evaluation." The morning of the final evaluation dawned clear and crisp, with a kind of perfect weather that seemed almost too good to be true. By 9 o'clock, Fairweather Farm was buzzing with activity as officials, judges, and spectators gathered for what had become the most talked-about horse training demonstration in the county's history. Marlowe stood in Aurelius's stall, her arms wrapped around his neck, drawing strength from his steady presence. 30 days ago, she'd been a nobody girl with $20 and impossible dreams. Now, in less than an hour, she would either achieve the unthinkable or lose the most important thing in her life. "The judges are here," Constance announced, appearing in the doorway. Dr. Martinez from the American Quarter Horse Association, Judge Patterson from the State Equine Board, and Mrs. Chen from the Regional Training Alliance, all impeccably qualified and completely impartial. And Mr. Ashworth arrived 20 minutes ago with his trailer and transport team. Constance said quietly, "He's confident you'll fail." Aurelius lifted his head at the tension in Marlowe's voice, nickering softly in reassurance. Over the past month, their bond had deepened beyond anything she'd thought possible. They communicated with glances, responded to each other's moods, and moved together with a synchronization that defied explanation. "Whatever happens," Marlowe whispered to Aurelius, "I want you to know that these have been the best 30 days of my life." The Colt's response was to gently rest his forehead against hers, their private gesture of connection that never failed to center them both. "Time to go," Constance said softly. The crowd gathered around the main training arena was larger than anyone had expected. Word had spread through social media and local news, turning what was supposed to be a simple evaluation into a public spectacle. Marlowe felt her stomach clench as she saw the cameras, the reporters, the dozens of faces all focused on her. Rutherford Ashworth stood near the judges' table, impeccably dressed and wearing an expression of polite confidence. Beside him, his horse trailer waited with its ramp down, ready to transport Aurelius to his new home. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Patterson announced, "we're here to evaluate the training progress of a 2-year-old Palomino Colt over a 30-day period. The evaluation will consist of basic ground manners, response to commands, and demonstration of the trust relationship between horse and handler." Marlowe entered the arena with Aurelius walking calmly beside her, no lead rope or halter needed. The crowd fell silent as they moved to the center of the ring. For the next 45 minutes, Marlowe and Aurelius performed flawlessly. They demonstrated leading, backing, turning, and stopping on voice commands alone. Aurelius allowed Marlowe to handle his feet, touch his ears, and examine his mouth, all signs of complete trust. When she asked him to navigate obstacles, he did so with confidence and grace. But the real magic happened during the freestyle portion of the evaluation. With no specific requirements to meet, Marlowe simply began to move around the arena, and Aurelius followed her lead. They wove patterns that seemed choreographed, changed pace and direction with invisible cues, and demonstrated a partnership that transcended traditional training methods. When they finished, the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Judge Patterson cleared her throat. "In 30 years of evaluating horse and rider partnerships," she began, "I have never seen anything quite like this. The level of communication, trust, and mutual respect is extraordinary." Dr. Martinez nodded in agreement. The traditional training benchmarks have not just been met, they've been exceeded in ways that frankly challenge our understanding of equine behavior. "However," Mrs. Chen interjected, and Marlowe's heart sank, "we must also consider practical concerns. Miss Finch, while your connection with this animal is remarkable, do you have the resources to provide proper long-term care? Veterinary expenses, quality feed, appropriate facilities?" Before Marlowe could answer, Rutherford Ashworth stepped forward. "With respect to the judges, sentiment cannot override practical considerations. This colt is valuable breeding stock. He needs professional facilities, expert veterinary care, and proper training for his future career. His future career as what? Marlowe found herself saying, surprised by the strength in her own voice. A show horse who performs on command. A breeding stallion who's valued only for his genetics. She looked at Aurelius, who was watching the exchange with alert intelligence. Or a partner who chooses his own path. Miss Finch raises an interesting point, Judge Patterson said slowly. Mr. Ashworth, your facilities are indeed superior, but we've just witnessed something that can't be bought or trained through conventional methods. The millionaire's composure cracked slightly. Are you seriously suggesting that financial resources and professional expertise should be ignored in favor of what? A fairy tale? No, said a new voice from the crowd. They're suggesting that some things are more valuable than money. Everyone turned to see an elderly man making his way through the spectators. Marlowe didn't recognize him, but she saw Ashworth's face go pale. Grandfather, Ashworth whispered. The old man Rutherford Ashworth too walked with the aid of a cane, but carried himself with unmistakable dignity. Rutherford, I've been watching from the back, and I think it's time. You remembered something important. Grandfather, this isn't the time. This is exactly the time. The elder Ashworth approached Aurelius, who regarded him calmly. 60 years ago, I was a young man with too much money and too little wisdom. I bought horses like other men buy. Cars because I could afford them, because they were symbols of success. He paused, his weathered hand reaching out to gently touch Aurelius's neck. But there was one horse, a mare named Starlight, who taught me the difference between owning and partnering. She chose me, just like this Colt chose this young lady. And those were the best years of my life. Rutherford III looked stricken. Grandfather, I never heard this story. Because I stopped telling it when I got too old to remember what really mattered. The old man smiled at Marlowe. Young lady, what's your name? Marlowe Finch, sir. Marlowe, let me ask you something. If I offered you $1 million for this Colt right now, would you take it? The question hung in the air like a challenge. $1 million would solve every financial problem Marlowe could imagine. It would pay for college, help her struggling family, set her up for life. But as she looked at Aurelius, who was watching her with complete trust, she realized there was only one answer she could give. No, sir, he's not for sale. The old man's smile widened. Rutherford, he said to his grandson, withdraw your claim. This horse has made his choice, and it's the right one. But grandfather, no buts. I'm still the majority shareholder in Ashworth Holdings, and I'm telling you too. Let this go. He turned to the judges. I believe you have your answer. Judge Patterson nodded solemnly. Based on the exceptional demonstration of partnership and the clear preference shown by the animal, we award custody of the Colt to Miss Marlowe Finch. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Marlowe barely heard them. She was too busy hugging Aurelius, tears streaming down her face as the magnitude of what had just happened sank in. There's one more thing, Rutherford Ashworth too said, raising his voice to be heard over the celebration. Miss Finch, I'd like to offer you a job managing the youth training program at Ashworth Stables. Full benefits, competitive salary, and facilities for your horse. It's time our family remembered that the best partnerships can't be bought. They have to be earned. Marlowe looked up from Aurelius's neck, speechless. Constance Fairweather was wiping tears from her eyes, and even some of the judges looked emotional. Do you accept? The old man asked. Marlowe looked at Aurelius one more time, and she could swear she saw him nod. We accept, she said, her voice strong and clear. both of us. As the crowd began to disperse and congratulations flowed around them, Marlowe realized that sometimes the most impossible dreams aren't impossible at all. Sometimes they just require the courage to believe that love and connection are worth more than money, that trust is more valuable than ownership, and that the most important choices in life are made not with our wallets, but with our hearts. Aurelius wickered softly and nuzzled her cheek, and Marlowe knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, the girl who bid $20 and the Colt who chose her over a fortune.